what's up? Welcome back to the books. Enough of this monkey business. No. Too much monkeying around. The audience is not having it. They say, get back to the books, son. We're not going to stay around for you watching 90s commercials. You give us the books and the education or we are out of here. So, all right. You don't want to joke around. We'll get back to the books. Get serious. You don't want to get serious. Bunch of serious people. Nobody wants to appreciate joking, having a good time, remembering the 90s. If you would hit like and share tonight, we are picking back up in our excellent text on the history of the Milner Group. And we got a couple texts that go along with it. I found some videos. We might look at those videos. We'll see. I don't know yet. But we're going to get back to the Johan Raitu book, independent Romanian historian, geopolitical analyst on the international elite that utilize entities like steering committees. And we saw today in the panel, I was on a panel on Twitter. I think maybe that audio will be up later, and you can hear that breakdown of one of the top journalists. Tony Gosling was on there covering the history of BIS. And if you're not familiar, the classic text, I just did an interview maybe a couple weeks ago with Daniel Estelin, author of the classic BIS Group. And that ties into tonight's talk because we're going to see the continuity between books like this, which I finally got a copy of this, The Last Will and Testament of Cecil John Rhodes. See that? Which is, of course, the origin of these people. And there's some really, really good insights in old D-Rock over there with your boy Jay-Z, right? Together with Jay-Z, they started Rockefeller Records, right? So we'll be getting into that here in a little bit, because the most important chapter in this book is the chapter where he talks about being a proud internationalist. And if you see here, you'll see what he says. Do you see that? So hopefully you can see that what we talk about is in the books. And that's, of course, the memoirs of David Rockefeller. And really this chapter is the most important part of the book. So we'll work our way through that chapter. But let's get back to Raitu, because we haven't been in his text in a while. And it's getting good because he's getting into the history of the EU and who was really behind the EU. And that's going to get us up to BIS. It's going to help us understand what's going on right now in Lisbon, Portugal, which is the BIS group. And if you remember, we talked about the origin of MI6 and the CIA, and the OSS. And I'll review that real quick just so we remember where we got that, because that's a really important page. And nobody ever talks about this. They never talk about the origin of MI6 and the Secret Intelligence Service of the UK, and how really that was a creation of the Milner Group. I'm trying to find where I've got this marked, but I can't find where I marked it. Because basically every page in this book is just so packed with information that every page, right, has every page has notes. Here it is. The origins of the MI6 and the CFR and how they really relate to the same entity. We talked about this last time, but we're going to do a little bit of a recap so you'll know what we're talking about. The Milner Group and its Morgan Rockefeller associates have always been close to the intelligence services. Britain's Foreign Intelligence Agency, the SIS, Secret Intelligence Service, aka MI6, was an interdepartmental service of the Foreign Office and the Admiralty of the War Office, all of which were run by the interlocking Cecil block or the Milner Group. It was created in 1909, MI6, by a committee chaired by Milnerite Richard Haldane. And he's an interesting character. He's got a lot of text, if I recall. He discusses things like eugenics and whatnot back in the day. Where is that? Its first chief was Mansfield Cumming, and you heard me cover this on one of the documentaries we watched, because he would sign everything with C, and then they knew that C was M, same guy that was the handler in the Bond novels to Bond, right? M stands for C, basically, because M would just write his name M. So Mansfield Cumming, and you'll notice his first name is M, so the last name Cumming, he would just write C. Well, when Ian Fleming wrote Bond, M as Mansfield, who was appointed the FO Undersecretary to Sir Charles Harding, was a protege of Cecil Block founder Robert Gascoigne Cecil. So Lord Cecil is Lord Salisbury, same guy. In 1940, the Milner Group was now headed by Lord Lionel Curtis, who was in charge of the Foreign Office and who controlled MI6, while Lord Halifax was the Foreign Secretary, and fellow Milnerite Lord Lothian was a British ambassador to the U.S. As part of the Milner Group and their global expansion, MI6 was set up in the U.S. with an American station called the BSC, the British Security Coordination. If you remember in that documentary we watched, they covered this, right? Because the BSC was involved in compromising one of the senators and duping FDR and getting old Wild Bill Donovan in charge of the OSS, right? So that's who helped set that up. It was basically a British intelligence operation, right? And that was William Stevenson running that, the BSC, basically, at Rockefeller Plaza. So who gave William Stevenson an office at Rockefeller Plaza? You bet. The entire hemisphere for all this coordination was then headquartered at New York's Rockefeller Center, run by... Yes, exactly. He was codenamed Intrepid. 1941, William Stevenson set up the COI, the Office of Coordination Information, which coordinated different U.S. intelligence operations. He was an advisor to FDR, and his collaborator, William Donovan, was appointed as the first OSS head. In 1942, in fact, the COI became renamed the OSS, and after the war in 1947, the OSS reorganized as the CIA. CIA, therefore, is a Milner-Fabian creation. It is part of MI6's global network. Banker Alan Dulles, the younger brother of CFR UN co-founder John Foster Dulles, was the first director. And, of course, he has a long history with Tiny Mustache Man, the Galen Network, Galen Org, Wolf, Reinhard Wolf, all those guys. So that's where we get that. And that also is part of Paperclip. And this is also why the founder of B-Berg is Prince Bernhard, who was a double S, follower of Tiny Mustache Man. Now, this is not to say that Tiny Mustache Man and his followers run everything. That's not true. But they were an arm, an adjunct, a tool of this establishment, of these people, of this international corporate banking power, which funded, aided, and built them up. And so when they lost, they were then just reintegrated. And if you didn't know, the German intelligence today is named after, it was started by Galen. Today's BND. Who started the BND in Germany? Galen. It amazes me. People don't know this. Now, that doesn't mean that today's German intelligence are literal Tiny Mustache Men, but that's the origin of it. It's the post-war allies set up the German BND through Dulles, through Angleton, and all these characters. So this is another reason why it helps to understand that higher level analysis that few people understand. Ever since this time, most CIA directors have, in fact, been CFR members. In 1943, David Rockefeller became a member of the Joint Intelligence Collection Agency, JICA, in French North Africa, where he worked with Henry Chevalier, who was the manager of Rockefeller's Standard Oil interest, to set up a private intelligence network, pages 112 and 113. And I've read that. I'll show it. It's in here. I'll show you. I've got my fingers in so many places I can't hold all the books. So here you go. Here is the chapter on that right here. You see that? Initiating an Intelligence Network in David Rockefeller's memoirs. So you can see this is not theory. It's not made up. It's all in the books. Now, for his purposes, he's utilizing this network, as we said, for Standard Oil. So that's really what this becomes about. But eventually, as we get into the 20th century, a big part of all of this is resources. Absolutely. Controlling the resources. And we'll look at that in a little bit when we get to what the basis for the BSAC, the British South Africa Company, was in the areas of Africa. It was about monopolies on resources. Not just diamonds, by the way, not just De Beers diamonds, but also oil and gold. That was a big part of what these entities ended up operating for. The intelligence services on both sides of the Atlantic were controlled by this group. They had key roles in this process. A key plank, for example, in the Marshall Plan, was the cultural reconstruction of Europe based on what Milner and the CFR dictated. In the early 1950s, the CFR controlled CIA and MI6 set up what they called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, CCF. Now, you thought this was an anti-Soviet, anti-communist thing, which that was part of it. But its real purpose was the Americanization of Europe. Through information, education, orientation, and agitation is the quote. The CCF was run by CIA officer Michael Josselson and was funded by the OPC, that's the Black Ops, using Marshall aid money, according to Stephen Dorrell, page 477. Another CIA MI6 co-op operation was the British Society for Cultural Freedom, which received funds from the Fairfield Foundation, which was a CIA front, and Lord Victor Rothschild. Lord Victor was, of course, former MI5 officer who engaged in a lot of interesting activities and was very close to Fabian's Beatrice and Sidney Webb. In fact, his wife, Teresa Tess, was Beatrice Webb's niece. There was always a close relationship between these. And, of course, this is why, eventually, how we get the BBC, because the BBC is funded by and aided by these people, the Milner Fabian circles. They're also why there was a decision to bring a lot of Muslims into Europe, which we've talked about many, many times, right? They were behind the Rockefeller, Kissinger, Beberg 70s oil crisis. That was all engineered by these people. And so that is a little bit of a refresher. And there's a curious and controversial thesis, by the way, by Raitu, which actually makes sense because I read this in another author who is making the exact same point, which was that in actual fact, the EU is ultimately a creation of Uncle Sam. So a lot of people think, oh, it was the Germans that created the EU. No, not true. The EU was actually a product of the European movement. And it was actually Churchill that called for the creation of the EU. And not many people know this. By the way, you can support the show via the Super Chat function. If you would, leave me a like and a share and a comment. But keep in mind, this power block, here's the main point we want to get right here. This power block, which was behind a lot of these peace deals and peace processes in the Cold War, it is certain banking institutions that decide what the reparations, give me my reparations, what the reparations will be post World War I and World War II. Who are the chief financial institutions that decided these reconstruction reparation debt programs? J.P. Morgan and Company, Lazard Frères, Bank of England, Bank of France, and the regional blocks and banks in the EU, including Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, European banks, Rothschild, Barclays, HSBC, Deutsche Bank. This is saying up until today, right? And then smaller banks as well, which are locked into these giant banks, which are then the main hubs of all the European operations, located in places like Frankfurt, Dublin, and the African continent of Johannesburg. And those tie into what we want to talk about, which is the Bank for International Settlements, which was created out of the post-World War II Bretton Woods system. And so it is the central bank of central banks. And most people don't know about the BIS. We did a whole lecture on the BIS because Quigley has a giant section on the BIS. So I will give you that if you want to get into the Quigley Talks where we summarize that. Of course, this one never comes up. Let's try Quigley. Amazing. So let's try Treasury Hope. So basically, the search engine just doesn't work. It's all right. It's on my homepage. So we come down here. Let's see. The Golden Bank for International Settlements. That's what I called it right there. Yeah. So here is that. You can see. We covered this many. That actually is the BIS, by the way. Pastor J, put your hands on the screen and I'll cure your gout. Put your hands on the screen and I'll cure your gout. Doot, 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 doot. Y'all don't know what I'm all about. Put your hands on the screen and I'll cure your gout. Na, 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 na. The Golden Bank for International Shakedowns. That's what I called this lecture. It is a classic. And it's amazing, too, that only 22,000 people made it to lecture number 2. So lecture number 1 of Tragedy and Hope has 57,000, and that drops to 22. So not even half of the people watched the freaking second lecture. What the heck is wrong with y'all? What is wrong with y'all? Bunch of lazies. Do your damn homework. Quit getting distracted. You bunch of lazies. I even did your homework for you. And you can't even finish. You can't even do the second lecture. What's wrong with y'all? What's wrong with y'all? So who was uniting the UN, the communists, and the capitalists? Big money. Big state capitalism is behind all of this in a singular push for what Jan Smuts, who was one of the key figures in the establishment of the United Nations, said would be a world government. Yalta was key because Yalta allowed the UN to plan for the way that the world would be divvied up. And by the way, Karl Marx was a supporter of and a fan of entities like the UN. As we talked about, Karl Marx's collaborator Wilhelm Liebknecht spoke of the creation of a United States of Europe and a United States of the world. So there you go. EU is something that even Marx and his collaborators found to be a good idea. And if you think about it, that's why they talk about united this, united that, right? A union. The American Union, the North American Union, the European Union, the African Union. And the UN has had a history of being precisely this controlled entity of typically socialists, right? Fabian socialists, Marxists, that's typically who's at the UN. And they kind of play this role of pseudo-left, globalist left, versus neocons in America, right? So there's a global false left-right dialectic, in other words. They're both globalists, right? The neocons are just as much globalists. They just have a different philosophy about how to do it. But in the final analysis, who helps train Mao's guerrillas? The OSS. Who writes glowing praises of Mao and Maoism? David Rockefeller, multiple times. And so that's why the UN had amongst its members many Soviets. And the US, for example, the American left typically prefers and can gather behind the ideas of the United Nations, although the stated aim of the UN was to prevent war. For example, in U.S. history, the U.S. Communist Party wrote that war cannot be abolished until capitalism is abolished. The United Nations will bring about this amalgamation, says the U.S. Communist Party. Now, the U.S. Communist Party has never been a serious thing. It's always been just this tiny, kind of insignificant thing. But you can see that the push that they have in their philosophy is essentially 100% Marxist socialist. But what those people are never aware of is what H.G. Wells talked about, which is that in the system of dialectics, you have to have both sides. This is how the dialectic works. And dialectics is what is the overall operating system of this overall globalist view. They operate on dialectics. And what does that mean? That means that you must always have the negation of your system. You can never totally have no negations until total revolution has been achieved. At that point, you would have, perhaps, right, in Marxist theory, the eventual withering away of the state, perhaps. Or you would just have a completely post-human world. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, maybe at that point when everybody's gone, then there's no more dialectics. But the idea here is that dialectics are itself the fundamental characteristic of the world, right? Atoms are in a dialectical tension. Their flux change, right? The molecules bumping, atoms bumping, electrons everything is flux. It's ancient flux philosophy. It's Heraclitus. And actually some of the Marxists and Leninists would actually say we are Heraclitians. We follow the philosophy of all is flux, thus all is change, all is revolution at all times. And so that is dialectics, the battle between opposing forces, which leads to the synthesis, basic Hegelian philosophy. And yes, that is Hegelian philosophy. Doesn't matter if he uses the phrase the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That is an accurate descriptor of his metaphysics. All these know-it-alls that want to be like, he didn't actually say the thesis. So what? It describes what he thinks. And Marxism is Hegelianism, turned on its head to be historical materialism, and then later dialectical materialism. So, both the international capitalist and the international Marxist have the same end goal. What? Internationalism. It's not that hard to figure out. But you don't know this if you're a normie corporate man, if you're a normie banking man, or if you're a groundswell idiot professor handler of Antifa people or communists on the street. You don't actually know that. You don't know that until you're at the higher rungs of people like this. These are the people that know this and write about it. And they know that most people are too stupid to figure out that, zillionaires run the world. Idiot commie professors don't run the world. They have a role to play in agitating, but they don't call the shots. David Rockefeller called the shots, not Bill Ayers. Now, if you're a servant to the system, you can work your way up and eventually become, running some think tank or something like that. I mean, they eventually gave, like Bill Clinton, a foundation. So you can have actual power at a certain point eventually. But the real money, the real power is in these families, is in these banking entities, these oligarchs, City of London, and so forth. That's where the real power is. Chatham House rules. And they give to Bilderberg what Bieberg is supposed to do, you see. If you would hit like and share, by the way, we are covering the history of the inner circle. And I wanted to touch on some of the plans of world socialism. World socialism being part of the dialectic, right? As Christian Rakovsky said, it needs its negation. It can never really function until it's always grappling with its negation. And eventually, he says, the world capitalist powers and the communist international will collapse, and the revolution will be victorious, he says, because of the international moneyed zillionaires. Yes, you heard me right. Here is one of the plans that was mentioned years ago in regard to this. The disturbing revelations demonstrate that ideological identity between communism, Marxism, Leninism, and democratic socialism include Fabianism. They enable us to establish well-defined ideological links between socialism, internationalism, and monopoly capital. Number one, as war disrupts the relations between the socialist states working for world socialism as much as it disrupts international trade, world peace serves the interests of both socialism and international capital. As only a world state run by a world government could guarantee world peace, world government then is the aim of both socialism and monopoly capital. This is why Friedrich von Hayek has an appendix at the back of Road to Serfdom that says we need world government. Who else says we need world government? Karl Marx. Well, I thought von Hayek and Marx hated each other. And here we're going to have a million low IQ libertarians and Austrian economists, know-it-alls, who are going to spout a million different things in the chat without actually addressing that point, that fact.
Well, you don't understand because of the principles of praxis, of praxeology, and blah, blah.
And they'll go on and on and on, never addressing this simple fact. Why does David Rockefeller talk about what I'm saying? These interests are united in their aim to abolish essentially the middle class, the right of private property, and so forth. And everything that you're seeing play out is this. It really is this. This is precisely why in communist Soviet blocs, specific Western banks were allowed to be set up. That is the scam. The revolution allows for the confiscation, collectivization, and transference of offshore ownership and wealth. That's the purpose of revolutions. That's what is said in Sutton's Wall Street and the Wall Street Revolution. This is why when you read Zbigniew Brzezinski, his technocratic socialism is not antithetical to monopoly capital. This is why David Rockefeller says that Mao's experiment was a great thing. This is why Andrew Carnegie loved and even got the winning approval of Bernard Shaw. Why would Bernard Shaw, the socialist, be a big fan of Andrew Carnegie and the Rockefellers? I'm not saying that all of the libertarians and Austrian economic people are literally low IQ. I'm just saying that they get so into that system that they're blinded to what I'm talking about when it literally would take 5 minutes to see if this is the case. I mean, why do you think Immanuel Kant writes essays for world government? He says that if we have a world government, we'll have world peace and world trade, you see. That's the very argument that the socialists make that I just read to you. Only a world state can guarantee world peace for free trade. But then when the world state comes to be, what interest does the world state have in you having free trade? None at all. So shut that down, baby. Now. CBDCs, BIS. Don't you remember the BIS guy saying, you're going to get your digital wallet and we'll shut you down when you say something we don't like? Remember the triple chin man? Here it is. Remember this?
Our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash, and there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability.
In other words, we will have complete control over who uses the currency. Did you not hear that?
Also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
No, so there you go. I mean, that's the BIS, the very entity that I just talked to you about, saying that you'll have a CBDC wallet and you will shut it off when we don't like you. That's what he's saying. Now, who gave the land to the United Nations to be set up? The charter. The Rockefeller family donated it. Who wrote the charter for the UN? It was written by over 40 Council on Foreign Relations members. Now, wait a minute, though. I thought the CFR was fighting the commies in the Cold War. No, they're not. There might have been some members of the CFR that were anti-commie. I want to say wasn't Alger Hiss? He was a CFR guy, right? And wasn't he calling for? At one point, he was calling for the third way. I remember reading this a long time ago. But it is precisely these secret councils that we're talking about. For example, the CFR was concerned with international relations for the purpose of directing American intercourse with the foreign nations. So in 1921, when it was set up, the claim was to direct America's international relations discourse and intercourse. To what extent the CFR actually directed foreign relations becomes evident from the fact that President Roosevelt was a virtual mouthpiece for the CFR. The State Department was dominated by CFR members ever since, and even though these interests control the President, the State Department, a superficial appearance of democracy was always maintained. For this purpose, various instruments were set up through which the UN was created. The War and Peace Studies Program, the Informal Agenda Group, and the Advisory Committee on Post-War Policy, particularly the Special Subcommittee on International Organizations, was headed by editors from the CFR and Foreign Affairs. And these are the secret councils that speak to and give policies to presidents. At this time, Secretary of State Cordell Hull was the chairman of the IAG Advisory Committee, and this was under Secretary Sumner Wells, who is a relative of the Astors. Thus, there was a vice chairman of the advisory committee set up. All these people were members of the CFR and would give policy to the president. And then we get the special subcommittee, for example, in 1944, the Dumbarton Oaks Conference, which set up the UN was done in collaboration with the IAG. 40 CFR members were present, with delegates in the 1945 San Francisco Conference, where the charter was written for the UN. This included the director of Johns Hopkins University, CFR President Isaiah Bowman at that time, President of the Carnegie Endowment, James Shotwell, CFR co-founder and future Secretary John Foster Dulles, Governor of New York Nelson Rockefeller, future President of the World Bank John McCloy, Secretary of the UN, and U.S. Special Political Affairs Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss. Is that relevant? I wonder. Who was that? And, oh, he was a spy for the Soviets. Wait a minute. But if I remember, wasn't he arguing with, he was trying to say we need the third way. I'm trying to remember where I found that. Yes. By this book by Dan Smoot, which is cited here, some CFR members were identified as Soviets. For example, Alger Hiss and Lachlan Curry. Right? Exactly. I thought so. And Hiss was a proponent of the third way. And this is really just another way to talk about Fabianism. Let's see how they characterize it. The third way is not tiny mustache man stuff, so don't get confused. Their third way is a centrist political position that attempts to reconcile right and left by advocating a synthesis. Yeah, dialectics, baby. The third way is born from a reevaluation of politics and policies from the 1980s on in response to, now it existed before that because you had people arguing for this even back then. In the time of Alger Hiss, they were arguing that we needed to go ahead and work with the Soviet Union and come to a synthesis, right, at that time. So the synthesis is basically what I'm calling third way, but it's not identified as this position until later. We get people like, I think, Blair, and Blair said we need a new synthesis capitalism. And I think Clinton said this too at one point. I think Bill Clinton was identified as this. Here we go. The third way has been promoted by liberal and democratic liberal parties. The leading proponent of the third way was Bill Clinton, who served as the country's president in 1993 to 2001. Now, who does Bill Clinton represent? He represents these people. See, this is proving my point. You see that? The UK, in the UK, the third way was advocated by Tony Blair. Again, who are these people? They're called Fabian socialists. It's the same thing. Third way theorists like Anthony Giddens said that they reject the state socialist conception of pure socialism and accepts the concept of socialism conceived of by Anthony Crosland as an ethical doctrine that views the democratic governments as having achieved ethical socialism. So basically social justice warrior stuff, removing the unfair elements of capitalism with a welfare system and policies that contemporary socialism has outgrown from the Marxist claim to abolish capitalism. Yeah, so in other words, rebranded Fabian socialism, because that's what Tony Blair was. This system promotes greater egalitarianism through actions to increase the distribution of skills, capacities, while rejecting total income redistribution as the means to do this. Yeah, that's the Fabian position. Exactly. Rather, it encourages public-private partnerships. Oh, yeah, you're going to be run by ESG and social credit score points dictated by BlackRock. Exactly. That's what this is. See. So there's that. What becomes evident is that the same persons who controlled international finance and endowments, that is, the foundations that engaged in the endowments, were also behind the CFR and U.S. foreign policy. David Rockefeller, for example, admitted that the CFR continues to influence American foreign policy and formulation to this day. 408. By the way, I figured out why people think I'm banging the table. They're like, stop banging the table. It's not banging the table. It's when I put a drink on the glass. I have figured out that that's what it is. Like Sir Mix-a-Lot said, put them on the glass. So I'm going to be setting the drinks on the books so I don't bang the table. Well, why are you listening to me in those stupid Bose headphones anyway? Just put me on speakerphone, dude. Put me on dial-up. Okay, where is this? David says this on page 408. Does he say that the CFR creates le policy? Let's see. The CFR. Let's see what Rockefeller himself defines it as. Now, wait a minute. This is longer than that. This is actually several pages, so I'm not going to read this whole thing, but he says, in 1971, the CFR had 17 female members. Oh, he's trying to virtue signal, but oh, we got women here too. It's fair. Now more than 3,600 strong. 1/3 of our members live outside of the New York City and Washington. Increasing geographic, ethnical, and professional diversity has accompanied the CFR. Oh, that's so great that you're diverse. Today, the membership includes William F. Buckley, Condoleezza Rice, Newt Gingrich, Mario Cuomo, Madeleine Albright, Bill Clinton. In short, its membership and its central location and its excellent staff and facilities include the tradition of rigorous debate and nonpartisanship rather than a pipeline into the White House. However, these are the reasons why the Council on Foreign Relations continues to influence the formulation of American foreign policy. The influencers. So there you go. See that? Well, I'm so glad they're diverse, David, because I was really concerned about your diversity scores on the CFR panel. Now, the most famous quote, of course, is a few pages earlier. And I want you all to see the famous quote because it always bears repeating. Can you read this with me there? You see that? For more than a century, okay, I can't put it over there and read it. So, for more than a century, ideological extremists on the right and the left have seized upon the well-publicized incidents, such as my chillin' with Fidel Castro, to say that the Rockefeller family wields inordinate influence that they claim that we wield over American political and economic institutions. Oh, no, you only created the CFR, you only set up Beberg, you only donated the land and helped set up the United Nations. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you don't have any influence. Some believe that we are part of a secret cabal working against the interests of the nation, characterizing my family as a group of internationalists that conspire around the world to build an integrated global political system. If that is the accusation, the charge, I stand guilty. I'm very proud of it. So, again, how many people are still going to be idiot, slow boys, and really just at this point kind of just dishonest, right? I mean, it's not It's not really a matter of being, it's a matter of being dishonest and lying about what is actually there. But to your own detriment, because if you followed what these beautiful people said in the last few years, you pay the price. Because who was behind Lockstep? Oh, the Rockefeller Foundation, exactly. Who say that you need to be depopulated. So, pay the price. Now, let's go back to other entities, as we said. The World Bank. Harry Dexter White from the Council on Foreign Relations helped to set up and establish the World Bank. John McCloy also helped to set up the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. These are giant Ponzi schemes that put the countries into debt. So it's a giant octopus of debt. And that's how the whole system runs. Post-war reconstruction simply meant putting everybody under Keynesian IMF World Bank debt to create debt slavery. This was the model of the Fabian Royal Society and their product, John Maynard Keynes, and the philosophy of the Bank of England that went into establishing the IMF. Also, by the way, the Bank of Belgium, which was run by Emile Franqui, who was an agent of Ralph Child. The USA then, and its families, its oligarchs, are behind the creation of the International Monetary Fund. And many of those who created the IMF were not just CFR, but also eventually involved in Trilateral Commission. So you get kind of a higher level policy stuff. People that Brzezinski was running the Trilaterals. And this is interesting. Two of their key front groups, which goes back to now in the time of Sutton's Bolshevik Revolution, right? It was Red Cross. They were using the Red Cross as a front for money laundering and aiding Bolshevism. But here he gets into some other aid groups that you might have heard about. In conjunction with the World Bank, other powerful bodies like the United States State Department, which was responsible for foreign affairs as well as international economic policy, and the U.S. Agency for Development, USAID, and the U.S. Export-Import Bank and the IMF formed a formidable lobby group for multinational corporations which established it and wield the interest of this fund. This group assists in its role of fifth columns operating in the target countries, consisting of recruited local banking elites and industrialists, political leaders, and technocrats, such as individuals who are Harvard and LSE educated and IMF trained economists. Did you hear that? USAID and US Corps, Peace Corps, this kind of stuff. These groups assist in creating fifth columns in other countries, which are adjuncts of the Anglo-American establishment. That's how this works in the foreign countries. They are indoctrinated with Keynesian ideology. This is why the whole world operates not on any kind of sound money policy, but on Keynesian, Fabian socialist economics. We can always just have more debt. And people can't figure out that this system is not there to make things better or to make it work. The system is there to be a control structure that steals generational wealth through inflation, which is theft. And it's a giant black hole of debt. And it's intentionally that way. Do you remember when Rakovsky is being interrogated by the NKVD? And the NKVD guy isn't fully initiated into the highest levels of the secret society of Marxism. And Rakovsky says it's a secret society that you're not fully initiated in. And the NKVD guy says, well, what do you mean? How am I not fully initiated? I've read Marx. I know what he says. And he says, because you still don't understand that capital is a part of the dialectic. What? They're the enemy. No. They're not the enemy. They further the dialectic. And they further that dialectic until there is the world state. The revolution is against the revolution. And if you remember in the interrogation, that blows the mind of Gabriel, the NKVD guy. He just can't fathom this. What? How could the revolution be against the revolution? And he says, well, haven't you noticed that the revolution always kills the revolutionaries? Why does it do that? Because the revolutionaries that bring in the revolution are the dupes. They're tools. They're tools on the grand chessboard. There's a higher level power. There's a higher level above the dialectic. And this is precisely why international corporations push Fabian socialism, Marxism, and all the agendas that you see today. I mean, everybody's mystified why the news about Target is out today. I'm not mystified. It's exactly what I've been talking about I've known about this for 20 years. One of the first things I read was how the United Nations was set up by the wealthiest people in the country, and they promoted socialism. Socialism is intimately tied to libido dominandi and booty revolution. Did you not know that? Of course it is. In fact, the 2007 and 8 financial crisis, the housing collapse, that was all Keynesian Fabian economics. And when this stuff fails, what do they say? Oh, should we rework our system? Should we consider maybe Paul Krugman got something wrong? No, they say more. More of the same. More of it. Oh, these policies are bad? More. The World Trade Organization was established in 1995 to supervise and control international trade. It is also a Keynesian Fabian socialist institution that replaced GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, created by the 1947 UN Conference on Trade and Employment. Its co-founder was LSE, London School of Economics, Fabian School lecturer Eric Wyndham White. Out of the World Trade Organization's 6 directors, well, he was writing this in 2016 or something, 3 of them have been socialists. Renato Ruggiero of the Italian Socialist Party, Mike Moore of the New Zealand Labour Party, and Pascal Lamy of the French Socialist Party. In addition, Lamy's predecessor, Supachai Panichpakdi. Supachai? What a name, dude. Supachai Panichpakdi of Thailand was a disciple of Dutch economist Jan Tinbergen, who preached the synthesis of capitalism and socialism known as the Third Way. UNESCO, for example, was the successor to the International Committee on Intellectual Cooperation, CC, which was created in 1945 to promote international collaboration in science and culture. The first director was British Fabian socialist Julian Huxley. Yes, the brother of Aldous. A close associate of the leading Milnerites of the world, including Lionel Curtis and David Astor. That's from the UN's website. It's not conspiracy theories. It becomes evident from the start that the UN has been a, quote, left-wing organization with leaders ranging from communists and Fabian socialists and Democrats to Rockefeller Republicans, as they are known. In fact, many NATO secretary generals have also been Fabian socialists. Paul Henry Spaak from 1957 to 1961, Willie Clays 1994 to 1995, Javier Solana 1995 to 1999, as well as NATO's first general, Lord Ismay. Now, wait a minute. I thought NATO was there to keep the Soviets at bay, to protect us against the commies. But now, wait a minute. Now you're telling me that a bunch of these NATO generals are socialists. Explain that. Well, the explanation is that many of the members of NATO, shocker, come from the CFR. As with other United Nations bodies, the main mover behind NATO, apart from socialist politicians, is an elite group of pro-socialist internationalists. In 1973, Secretary of State and Rockefeller frontman Henry Kissinger was openly pushing for dialogue with communist Russia. But remember, this is the CIA capitalist West fighting against the evil Russian commies. One of the key elements in this control that's overlooked is the control of religion. Thus, religion became a crucial organization targeted by the Rockefeller family. And we've covered this many times, not going to rehearse this. Riverside Church, which is set up by Rockefeller Sr. He basically installed Harry Fosdick, the liberal theologian of the time, and basically started preaching the social gospel, which leads to the creation of Union Seminary, funding of the World Council of Churches, National Council of Churches, which are also peopled by a bunch of Fabian socialists. Reinhold Niebuhr, the famous liberal theologian, is one of these characters propped up by these people. He is, in fact, an operative of these people. And you'll notice that the same controlled opposition establishment groups like the Tides Foundation, which is a Soros entity, together with the Tides Center and other interlocking creations, fund through its network of private groups and foundations and think tanks American religious organizations to steer into institutional capture, to change and steer their policy. Exactly what we have talked about ad nauseum. Thus, the National Council of Churches was peopled by Fabians, and the World Council of Churches was peopled by and started by the Rockefellers. In fact, the founder, the guy running it, the Rockefellers put the money into it. The guy running it was Wysert Hooft, who was himself British intelligence, or a closely linked to British intelligence. Wysert Hooft maintained his close links to MI6 and the OSS out of Geneva in the 1940s, as well as making links with the KGB. Ostensibly, he was trying to promote the unity of faith through ecumenism. Thus, this became a giant tool for the promotion of ecumenist new Christianity and the creation of a new society where Christianity reconciled with Marxism and socialism. And here's a weird factoid. This new society would be erected on socialist lines, and it went on to fund anti-Christian Marxist groups like Rhodesia's Patriotic Front, which was run by Robert Mugabe, the crazy, corrupt warlord. So there you go. That's who we're talking about. Nice people. So that's what ecumenism is really about. Ecumenism is a tool of geopolitical control, as I've been trying to explain ad nauseum for so long. And it's not that hard to figure out. It's in all of these books, clear as day. He writes about the ecumenist movement and the creation of the social gospel, the creation of Riverside Church, where they have statues to Muhammad, to Darwin, to Moses. Yes, Riverside Church has statues, not to the apostles, but Jesus amongst Moses, Buddha, Darwin, Muhammad. Literally. Ultimately, the UN has as its goal the creation of enforced cultural relativism. It is then a clash of civilizations model, which is intended to clash to produce a synthesis. The origins of the EU, by the way, which is mentioned by Victor Hugo, comes out of Lord Salter and his plan as a Fabian to create a united Europe. And then another figure named Joseph Redinger, out of British intelligence, Special Operations Executive Joseph Redinger, also began to call for the creation of an EU, together with Count Coudenhove-Kalergi. The plan was then to create a United States of Europe, but this was an Anglo-American establishment creation in 1957 under the Treaty of Rome, but it was not actually planned via the Treaty of Rome. It was planned by the Milner and U.S. elite. And so what was this all about? Well, basically it was about controlling post-war Germany, keeping it down. That was the main goal. And that's why there's so much psyops in post-war Germany funded by the CIA at the time. And these were actual re-education programs, and they were CIA experiments in culture creation at the time. And so Churchill, when he calls for the EU, people don't know that Churchill called for the EU. Well, he's one of the first. Who were the handlers and the funders behind Churchill? Lord Birkenhead, Lord Esher, Sir Ernst Cassel were all figures in the background handling Churchill. Now, I'm not saying Churchill didn't say some true things. He said some true things at times. But Churchill was also a druid. So, not sure why I'm supposed to take him so seriously when, you know, dude's literally out there as a freaking druid. And did you see, of course, people dug up the Queen. The Queen in her druid rites. So there's Churchill wearing his druid garb. Winston Churchill was initiated into the Albion Lodge of the Ancient Order of Druids, 1908. There he is right there. And somebody dug up the Queen being initiated into the Druid Order. Where's the video? I want to see the... Yeah, somebody found the actual video of it. They're saying, oh, she's just a bard. Okay, yeah. Bard initiate. Yeah, give me a break. Oh, well, it is an archdruid, but it's just the bard.
Neurologists are stunned.
Oh, yeah, she's just being initiated into being, Shakespeare, basically, right? So here's the druids. And this is what Churchill was initiated. Yeah, it is. It does remind one of Bohemian Grove, doesn't it? And this is a recurring pattern. Remember who's the pro Skittles, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Archlayman of Canterbury? And he was also, what do you know, inducted into the same Druidic order. Why? I'm noticing a pattern here. I'm not supposed to notice that, right? It makes me a bad person if I notice things. How dare you figure out that the Archbishop of Canterbury, I can't get this on the screen. There we go. What do you know? He's initiated into the same druidic order. I'm noticing a pattern here. Rowan Williams, druid. Churchill, druid. So guess what? The real religion of these people is pagan, isn't it? Seems like it. If they take that seriously, and presume they would take that more seriously than the fake Christianity that they have as a sort of a front when Charles was coronated. And how many, page not found? Yes, it is. Then I hit the wrong thing. There you go. Yeah, you think I photoshopped this today? Oh, I just make up a conspiracy. I'm going to make a conspiracy up that they're all druids. Just make it up. I'll photoshop the page and pretend to give the link out. I mean, come on, dude. Give me that old-time religion, that old-time religion. When I call down Cthulhu, I need that old-time religion, that old-time religion, that old-time religion where I call down Cthulhu. Give me that curse of the sea goblins, that curse of the sea goblins, curse of the sea goblins from old Cthulhu. Give me that Yog-Sothoth, that Yog-Sothoth. Old-time religion. Where the old ones break on through. Old ones break on through to the other side. Old ones break on through to the other side. Like Jimmy Morrison, them old ones break on through to the other side. Y'all like that shit slapping. My nose is itching now. Alright. Because it's good enough for me. If you guys would hit like and share. Also support the show via super chat functions as we make our way through. Churchill, very close to the Ralph boys. King Ralph child, right? John Goodman over there, King Ralph child. In fact, the Brinko Trust Corporation, Brinko Trust, basically bailed out Churchill, the story goes. So he was in debt. This thing bailed him out. And a guy named Sir Strakosch basically bought off Churchill. There's also rumors that Churchill was into gross things, but I don't know if that's true, but who wouldn't be surprised. So basically the Cliveden set, the Milnerites, ended up controlling Churchill. And they pushed him to push for the world bloc model of creating a united Europe. And so that's why Churchill called for all this EU stuff. Thus, the EU was designed to suppress and control the Germans. And this comes out of the European Coal and Steel Community, which becomes the European Community, which becomes the EU. And guess where the strategizing and planning of that was formalized? Right here. In fact, Daniel includes the actual old documents about that. I thought I have this marked somewhere where he talks about it. So this is a confirmed, right? Multiple sources basically confirming this. Prince Bernhard, Tiny Mustache Man, Joseph Redinger, Dr. Redinger. All the people that you've heard me mention, they're mentioned here in one of these early Beberg meetings. But there's a specific document where he shows the European community being set up. Brzezinski pushing a global tax. Wow, that's pretty crazy. Where is it? Now I can't find it. I thought it was in the PDF section, or the appendix to the back, where he's got all these documents of the founding of Bilderberg. But now I can't find it. There's an actual one that talks about the discussion of the creation of the European community. I think in the 50s, 1950, I want to say 55 or something. Let's just read a book together. It's really, really boring. Let's read a book together. There's a bunch of pictures of Bilderberg in like Chantilly, Virginia. Bilderberg. All right. Well, I can't find it, but it's in there somewhere because I've lectured on it multiple times. But just get the book and read it. You'll see what I'm saying. The Marshall Plan also played a key role in this, because Marshall Plan aid was directed via the CFR for the purpose of aiding and creating the EU. And so the American ACUE, what does that stand for? ACU, where is it at? Here it is. The CFR controlled the government funding of the European movement and the American Committee on United Europe, ACUE, through which the funding was channeled. The ACUE was formed in 1949 by Chatham House elements linked to the intelligence services. Its chairman was Wild Bill Donovan, the former head of the MI6 created OSS, and the CFR founder, later director, CIA Director Alan Dulles, who was appointed the ACUE vice chairman. CFR Director George Franklin was the ACUE secretary. So it's all the U.S. intelligence people, the founders, behind the EU. Especially significant is the fact that the unification of Europe was not only U.S. policy, it was actually the precondition of the Marshall Plan aid, as stipulated by U.S. Congress at this time. And that's Stephen Dorrell, pages 464 to 465. You see that? He has a bunch on Redinger and all that. And you'll see that he talks about here. So there's Dorrell on the ACUE and the US setting up the EU. Now, when I say the US, I'm talking about these people. It's not America. And then we get the creation of BIS, to which Raitu devotes its own whole thing, and he notes this tie-in of the BIS in the establishment of the EU. So BIS played a key role in really strategizing and making it congeal. All right. We're going to pause there with Raitu, and if you want more of this, I might try to knock out I don't know if there's still a lot of this book left. We're almost 250 pages in, and this goes all the way up to basically 500. So we're still only halfway. So we'll probably get another couple more talks out of this book. But the rest of what's in here we will save for part 2. And I wanted to walk through old Dave's book here in this most important chapter. I think you're going to appreciate this. because a lot of people don't have this book. Guys, people don't get books anymore. I don't know. But no, people don't want books. They want to read. They want to be slow boys. I mean, that's your loss, dude. You know, we're over here helping people get a real education, explaining how the world really, this is how the world really works, okay? It doesn't work the way that your normie professor and your normie veteran dad and your normie family members think. It works the way I'm telling you, because it's the way they explain it. So if you want to support the show, do so via the super chat function as we read here in Dave's book. I don't know where everybody's, we just had like 60 people leave, but we're not done. Y'all just left. We're getting to the meat right now. A bunch of y'all boring slow boys just clicked. Dude, what is going on? Like, people lose their attention span. I noticed the average viewer can only watch a video for 20 minutes. Y'all, come on. We got to do better than this. 20 minutes? We're not all going to make it, bro. If you can't watch and focus on this stuff for more than 20 minutes. Stop scrolling. The scroll is destroying your attention span. Get off of the scroll, dude. This stuff is not helping you. All of y'all out there, get off the scroll. Don't doom scroll. Begin to practice not scrolling through gibberish all day and people fighting all day. I want to see you guys spending more time doing productive things than the scroll. Make that a challenge to yourself. And I'm speaking to myself too. Jamie and I are both actively avoiding and fighting the scroll. Now, thankfully, I still read a lot, so it hasn't completely destroyed my focus and my attention. But I don't want to just be somebody who's able to read a lot and also scrolls. I want the scroll out of my life. So we are instituting discipline policies, for example, of we do certain things at certain times. Then we're not doing scrolls at night. Okay, we're doing other things. We're hanging out. We're reading books. We're going to the park. We're doing whatever, working out, etc., etc. Because this scroll it's got to stop, dude. This is, we're overlooking the things that are really messing people up, dude. And a big part of this is the freaking internet itself. It's time to be honest. Yes, it can be good, but I mean, the internet is just going to destroy the world, dude. We got to put this stuff in check. So how does he begin this book, or excuse me, this chapter? Remember, the most important, now the book is full of nuggets and crazy insights, right? Because it's David Rockefeller writing it, but he begins by saying that I am a proud internationalist. That is the chapter, proud internationalist. So we know a lot of honesty, a lot of admissions. He says that my lifetime's pursuits are internationalism. And he talks about his family's relationship to the CFR, to the United Nations. And he says that I was very happy to go and speak with and meet people in in communist China. I was happy to go talk to people involved in the Velvet Revolution. I was happy to meet Yasser Arafat, leader of the PLO, even though many consider him a terrorist. I was happy to meet Fidel Castro. He says that these ironies abound. With the exception of Havel, I don't know who Havel is, these men vowed to the death to fight American imperialism. However, by the end of the Cold War, they flocked to the center of world capitalism, eager to meet and make deals with banking elites and corporate executives. He's telling you he knows how this actually works because he's one of them, these elites. Castro wanted especially to come and meet me. This was eventually hosted by UN Secretary Boutros Ghali, and Castro spotted me in the lounge and came and shook my hand and greeted me warmly. I was chagrined, and I sensed that a photo frenzy was about to erupt. I smiled as the paparazzi snapped away. Predictably, the photo of the capitalist and the communist became a front-page newspaper headline from Ankara to Zanzibar. Just as predictably, I was criticized for appearing with the supposed enemies of the country. One of our nation's most bitter enemies, For example, my daughter Peggy had visited Cuba many, many times. Since 1985, she developed good rapport with Castro. By the way, this lends credence to Servando Gonzalez's analysis of Castro. This might explain Castro's behavior. I did meet privately with Fidel the next day at the CFR. So now you see where I was getting this stuff with Castro. And it's not just this, Servando Gonzalez wasn't just pulling this out of his butt. I mean, he's a smart guy. But there's the footnote where he says this. Why is Fidel at the CFR meeting chilling with David Rockefeller? See the footnote? Can you read it? He says, I'm not going to reread the quote about creating a world government and that he's proud of it. It's been read 1,000,000 times. You should get it by now. He says that populists and isolationists ignore the benefits from our active international role. Not only was the threat posed by Soviet communism overcome, there have been fundamental improvements in societies around the world as a result of global free trade and improved communications. In other words, the surveillance that came out of the Cold War. The heightened interaction of people from various cultures, multiculturalism, then, he's saying, has actually helped defeat the Cold War. Give me a break. Populists rarely mention the good side of the Cold War and all that and his international actions, nor can they explain how we could have sustained the American economy without expanding Wait a minute. Let me read this again. They cannot cogently explain how American isolationists would have sustained American economy and growth and our expansion of political power without communists. Well, first of all, I mean, that's so ridiculous on multiple levels. Like, his own Brzezinski cites Anthony Sutton as the one who says that we built up the Soviet Union. So, does he mean that, or is he saying that we literally need communism for capitalism to work? I mean, it's just crazy. Then he goes on to talk about the creation of the UN, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, and NAFTA, and how his family worked intimately in creating these things, and that the evil Americanist isolationists are the ones who have tried to stop him. The free flow of investment, goods, and people, and no borders, he says, is absolutely necessary. This is democratic. And then he says that the CFR was crucial because my family has been a staunch supporter of ecumenism. His family bankrolled the ecumenist movement right there. Now, this is treated of in much more detail in the authorized biography of the Rockefellers. But here he is just giving a nod to it right there. I found the Council of Foreign Relations in New York to be the best place to pursue my interest in global affairs. I'm sure, of course. He says, yes, Dulles was, quote, small, tiny mustache man neutral, but he was very useful for our CFR. He says now the CFR, by the way, is diverse. There's so many women. We have so much diversity. And now that diversity, he says, is great to influence American foreign policy. Now, wait a minute. Why are these random, unelected randos influencing foreign policy? I thought we elected politicians to do this stuff. No. These people are above them. Can you not see this? This is why things don't change and things don't get fixed. It's what I'm telling you right now. It's what he says. Anyway, he goes on to say that some of our intellectual think tanks, foundations, and so forth, what their job is, the different universities, is they're basically there to predict future trends. Then he says that predicting future trends over the next decade will be concerned with regional conflicts, armed control, military balance, and human rights, particularly the environmental degradation. So the intellectual sphere, the academic sphere, is just a control structure. And then he says Blackstone. When I was a chairman in 1985 of the council board member, I was succeeded by Peter Peterson, secretary of the Blackstone Group. Then he says, not BlackRock, but Blackstone. And he says that this council, together, we put together many trips overseas. And together, this allowed me to go and study and investigate the Israeli problems, Gaza problems, blah, blah, blah. And then he gets into Cuba, Castro, Venezuela, again, communism. And he says that, but one of the key elements that we were involved in is BIS. BIS. The thing that doesn't exist, which is in his memoirs. And he says that the conspiracy theorists love it. They love BIS. Not because they're wrong, but he says that because they're just dumb conspiracy theorists and they don't have $1 zillion. It was actually started by, together with Prince Bernhard, the former SS, former Tiny Mustache Man. Right there. He says that also Etienne d'Avignon was a key person there, and Etienne d'Avignon he says that he represents a new reinvigorated BIS. Now, he was writing this in, what year was this? 90s, I think. So I guess they let Bilderberg slide for a little while. They let it get a little weak. And where's the publication date? Is it ripped out? 2003. So he's saying, oh, we didn't really care about BIS. But Etienne d'Avignon is interesting because he's one of the figures who, according to, I believe it's d'Avignon, Sutton and Wood destroyed the American coal and steel industry. I think he said. It's the steel industry. So essentially these elitists are there to shut down certain areas of the economy for the elite. Anyway, it's somewhere in this. I read it last night. I forgot where it was, but it's in the Patrick Wood book. But he says, oh yeah, and so in other words, he probably got promoted to this job because he helped shut down American steel. And then here's some curious things you wouldn't expect to be here. Members of the Pacenti group were all committed to European political integration. That is the further EU movements. Archduke Otto of Austria, the head of the House of Habsburg, Monsignor Alberto Giovannetti of the Vatican, and Opus Dei, together with Jean-Paul Léon Viollet, were preoccupied with the Soviet threat. The Pacenti set the agenda for our thrice-year meetings at Maitri-Volée and the French intelligence services. So he's saying that we were having these meetings. Jean Monnet, Robert Schumann, Konrad Adenauer, founding members of this group, but I joined later. And the roster at that time included Antoine Pinet, Giulio Andreotti, Prime Minister of Italy, Joseph Strauss of the Christian Social Union Bavaria, and Henry Kissinger. These were at one point, this is wild, he says, these were at one time, the Pacenti group was an overlapping structure with Biberg. And this is a guy, Carlo Pacenti, who was a Italian zillionaire who I met at Chase Investment Forum in Paris, who connected with French intelligence, set up another inner group within Biberg, and he specifically mentions Opus Dei and the Vatican. Their push was for further EU integration. Now, this is again prior to the actual establishment of the EU, but there it is. Because the EU isn't technically, right? It technically comes to exist in the, 90s? But the EU was planned in the 1950s at Biberg, and here he's mentioning this Pacenti group, which is an inner group together with French intelligence within Biberg. Then he goes on to talk about other international entities and groups that he was a part of. ECAT, Emergency Committee on American Trade. Some other thing I've never heard of called International Executive Service Corporation. Just there's an infinite number of these things. And then he says that we had to fight protectionism, that is, against tariffs and push for free trade. Some of these meetings I met with Eugene Black of John Deere, or Deere and Company. I don't know if that's John Deere or what. And then I went to see Arthur Watson of IBM, and I persuaded him to take the lead in forming ECAT, which was basically top CEOs, right? Basically, that's all that is, running some other higher level thing. Then we created Trilateral Commission for Brzezinski to run. And he says that conspiracy theorists love this, but he doesn't say they're wrong. He says that Trilateral is like Bilderberg, but it's a benign, benevolent organization. Okay, sure. He says in 1972, I learned about Zbig, and me and Henry put him there running that. And the purpose of Trilateral, he says, was the creation of a new world economic order. And he says that this comes out of the OPEC oil shocks. In other words, it was engineered, as we know, which we've covered a million times. If you guys would hit like and share. Now, the next page, he says that some people have thought to challenge the Trilateral Commission and call it out. In fact, in the 1980s, late 70s and in the 80s, there was actually a president who called out the Trilateral Commission. And his name was Ronald Reagan. And he thought he would get uppity big boy pants. And when he called out the Trilateral Commission, something happened to him. And he stopped doing that. Now, David Rockefeller doesn't say, I was behind that. He just says that Ronald Reagan came to understand the Trilateral Commission's value. How do you think he came to understand it? Yeah, exactly. It has never been a sinister force. It's just a place to get together and dialogue. Yeah, sure. He says, all of these organizations, here's his final statement. All these organizations reflect something I learned as an intelligence officer, that my effectiveness would depend upon my ability to create networks. Right there. I kept a record of all the people I ever met, and this has been very useful. And then he ends the whole thing by saying that I'm proud to be working for a world government right there. Proud internationalist. So there you go. There's one chapter, probably the most important chapter in that book, that really just lays out everything that I talk about, everything I've been saying. It's nothing to do with theories. It has to do with objective facts, objective claims by very powerful people. What they want, what they work for, what they support, the steering committees that they create, and what the goals of those committees are. Now, if you want to sign up at the website for part 2, that'll be up in the next few days as we work our way through the Raitu book, covering the history of the Milner Fabian Society. And eventually, yes, we'll read because it's not that long, eventually we'll read the last will and testament of Rhodes, what his game plan was. But if you want the full talk, go and subscribe to the website or on my Rockfin. And the link is in the show description. It's $4.95 a month, very cheap. You get a graduate level education in international relations, better than what you get at the brainwashed universities, because they're not going to tell you all this stuff. Porphyry, $1. Christ has risen. I've been on here a while. I'm wondering if you do one-on-ones. I'm sorry I don't have time to do that anymore. I used to do one-on-ones, but now I have the philosophy course lecture, and you can sign up for tutoring. I'm working on my thesis in Russian literature at Berkeley. I could use your help. Honestly, I don't know a lot about. I mean, I've read Dostoevsky at length, but I don't know. Beyond that, I'm not very good in Russian lit. But thank you for that, and hope to see you in Cali in July. Porphyry says, well, hey, yeah, exactly. I'll be doing a presentation, comedy, and book event together with my wife, who will be doing a presentation on Hollywood. Mine will be on philosophy and comedy. And Jamie Kennedy will be doing stand-up. So there's the tickets for the Los Angeles event, July 6th. And also Father Deacon will be doing a talk on technocracy as well. He will be in California at that same time, and so he'll be speaking as well. So get your tickets. It's going to be a lot of fun, book signing and so forth. Josh Garrett, $40. The Nerd Chat and the 90 stream was fun. Go Class of 97. Yeah, that's what we are. Class of 97. Appreciate that. Thank you for taking nerddom to the next level. Chad nerds, dude. We're not nerd nerds. We're Chad nerds. And so shout out to my fellow Class of 97, Josh Garrett. That stream was just supposed to be fun. I don't know. People show up for the education, but they don't show up for the fun. But education is part of the fun. And we shamelessly promote infotainment over here. We're all about it. So if you didn't watch last night's 90 stream, it was fun. I just went through, because a lot of people our age, or in our day, especially the younger people, like they don't know what the world is like before the internet. And I was the last generation of coming of age before the internet. So I came of age right when the internet was really becoming omnipresent. So that's last night's stream if you want to watch that. We got some bangers coming up too, by the way, if you didn't know. If you go over to the live section, I hope did you like the Cthulhu Lovecraft stream? That was fun. Surprised that didn't get more views. But we went deep into 8 different Cthulhu films. Lovecraft influenced films. There's the link for that. But if you head on over to the live section, we got some great shows coming up. We got me and Jamie doing Occult Noir. That's going to be fun. And yes, I decided to go ahead and tell you which films we're doing right there. We're going to do Psycho, White Heat, Sunset Boulevard, Seawolf, maybe Key Largo, and maybe Black Cat. And also, you can head on over here to... Where am I at? Here. Saturday, Brittany Sellner, aka Brittany Pettibone, if you remember her as Pettibone, now she's Sellner. She had me on. We had a great conversation about Hollywood. She's going to be coming on to talk about feminism, nihilism, and postmodernism. So we're going to have a great chat with her Saturday. So look for that. That's going to be fun. And Meta Ninjas says for $10, thank you for this education. You got it, buddy. Keep that spelling on point. Demian 602, $40. I watched you host the 4th hour of Lord Voldemort for a year. I finally caught you live. I'm sharing my Zen crypto gains with Based JD. So is Zen a crypto, or you're saying like Gen X crypto? I don't know what Zen is. XEN crypto. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for letting me know that you got those gains. God bless you and your folks as well, Demian 602. Rigovich. Don't be a Riga bitch. Be a Riga bitch. 371. Do not spend all of this $3.71 at once. I won't. I promise. JNL21842, $20. Please accept this as repentance for getting distracted. Repentance from... Wait, what? You ain't got to repent to me, dude. Getting distracted from your work or from me? It is dang near impossible to listen to your new and old stuff if I'm a newbie. Why is that? You mean you don't understand what we're talking about? Or what do you mean? Let me know what you mean. Help me out here. Thank you for all your hard work. Well, thank you, JNL, for that $20. You guys helped me keep going here. Daddy, $5. I appreciate you, mate. Well, thank you, Daddy. Gary says $25 and he doesn't say anything, but that's okay. He says silence. The sounds of silence from Gary. Also, I want to remind you, too, that beyond all these great books, we also have great sponsors, the best of which is our favorite, Chalk.com. If you head over to Chalk.com right now and use the promo code J50, you get 50% off the show sponsor, which is Chalk and their 7 Wonders. I'm actually drinking in this, believe it or not, it's water. But inside this water, I am also taking my Tongkat Ali. So, yes, I will actually dump the Tongkat Ali into the water, shake it up, and just drink it. It's bitter, but I like it that way. And that is true. Tongkat Ali is peer-reviewed. You can go read the peer review studies over at Chalk.com. Proven to boost testosterone, because we're all about that toxic masculinity over here. So up your toxic masculinity points by heading over to Chalk.com and use the promo code J50, J-A-Y-50, to get 50% off all those great Chalk products, including the She Legit, including the Irish Moss. I mean, you can't be She Legit for mental focus and clarity. Jamie loves it. When she takes She Legit, she reads all day long. And I can guarantee you that it will help you with mental focus and clarity for sure. Especially if we're in this doom scroll mode where we've lost our attention spans. Get some of this She Legit, dude. And stop scrolling. Also, you can use the promo code J53Life. That's J-A-Y-53-L-I-F-E. J53Life to get 53% off all the products over at Chalk.com. And in so doing, you can sign up for recurring subscriptions. Recurring Chalk. You can't beat that. They have stacks for men and stacks for women. Again, how can you beat that? You can't. Get over to Chalk. Go ahead and just check it out. Use the J50 if you want to try it out. But use the promo code JAY50 to get that 50%. Also want to remind you guys to go over to Rockfin, the best free speech-based platform out there. We are, by the way, I'm on my way to 40,000 on Rockfin. 37,222 on Rockfin. So head on over there. Make yourself a profile. There's the Rockfin. It's free to sign up on Rockfin. And there's a lot of great paid content as well. And I'm still in the process of moving the videos to Rockfin. We have over 1,000 videos, so I don't know, I've done probably 700 are over there now, maybe something like that. 500, 700. So it takes forever. I'm still doing it. And that's why if you want full access to all my archives, you have to subscribe to the website, because it takes forever to put all this stuff on Rockfin. We've been on Rockfin for almost 2 years, and I've gotten, 500 to 700 videos up over there. I'm also now putting things on Twitter, because Twitter has opened up. So you can watch my long form content on Twitter as well. And we're approaching 45,000 on Twitter. We'll be at 50 before you know it on Twitter. So that's some new milestones there. 40,000 on Rockfin, 50,000 on Twitter soon. But you also want to go over to Rockfin to sign up for Richard Grove, who is the best podcast out there when it comes to geopolitical breakdowns, along with our podcast. I mean, Richard and I are a great team. We work great together. We love doing podcasts together and chats. And he and Tony engage in 7-hour talk fest that you can't beat. It's not boring. It's great. I love and consistently watch Grand Theft World. And I want you to go check out Grand Theft World as well by subscribing on Rockfin and following Richard there, as well as over on YouTube. And also follow Richard on Twitter. He's a great tweeter. He's a great tweeter, man. Tweet. Anyway, also follow our buddy Scott Mannion over on YouTube, putting out good stuff, making those historical deep analysis videos.